Today, No Kings rallies are happening across the country as activists and advocacy groups speak out against executive overreach. As we take this live look outside from EarthCam at the National Mall, preparations for today's demonstrations are already getting underway. These protests come as Americans navigate political divisions and questions about government power. And to provide some context and historical perspective, we're joined by Thomas Berry, director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. Thank you so much for being with us today. I think one of the main questions a lot of people have is how does the No Kings movement, how does it fit into the history of protests against executive power?
America has a long history of protests going back before we were even an independent country, going back to protests against the Stamp Act that the British imposed on the U.S., no taxation without representation, and then, of course, the Boston Tea Party, two of the precipitating events to the Declaration of Independence. And then in that interregnum between independence and the Constitution, we had Shays' Rebellion, which was one of the major factors ending the Articles of Confederation and leading us to create the Constitution. So we have had a long tradition, which is why the First Amendment explicitly enshrines the right to peaceably assemble.
So we talk about executive overreach, then what legal principles are most relevant there?
Essentially, it's the separation of powers. It's the idea that the legislative branch is in charge of policy making, the executive branch is in charge of executing the laws and the policies made by Congress. Where you have executive overreach is where the president decides he's going to make policy, he's going to do what he wants, whether Congress has passed a law authorizing it or not, or he's just going to use excuses or justifications like national security to effectively impose his will and viewpoints on the country.
How do peaceful protests like this, how do they strengthen democratic engagement?
They essentially demonstrate to people that you have the right to speak out and that any given administration is not entrenched and not permanent. I've seen social scientists suggest that even just 1 or 2% of the population coming out and demonstrating is a strong factor suggesting that the current majority is in trouble or the current administration is in trouble. And it shows that, you know, it's not just the right to vote, it's the right to speak out and get more attention for your point of view.
When civic discourse turns into, partisan and divisive, what do you think are the risks there?
Well, certainly there's a risk of spiraling down and not being constructive and turning into essentially just name-calling and things like that. It's important for civil discourse to be focused on the merits, to be focused on policies rather than tearing each other down. And I think it's important for one side or the other to kind of take the high ground, to not just be tit for tat and meet insults with other insults. But
we haven't seen that happen. I think now we're in this time where the lower you go, the lower I can go. I think when you boil it down, do things like this, do they have positive outcomes?
It's to be seen. They can have positive or negative outcomes in the long run. But certainly I think any movement that reminds people about the importance of the separation of powers, the importance of our system of government, that no president is in power permanently, it's a good thing whatever your ideology is. It's not just a left or a right-wing thing. And of course we've seen protests under presidents of both parties going back to, for example, the modern Tea Party protests under President Obama, just as much of a right to do those.
Right. How do people stay engaged beyond demonstrations like this?
If you're not interested in demonstrating and going out, I think just writing letters to the editor, having smaller groups, discussion groups with other people, just reading and keeping up with the news, and of course voting. There's a ton of different ways in our democracy to be engaged or to have an effect on the government.
Do you anticipate we'll keep seeing these No King protests during this administration?
It seems like it. This is the second major one. There's a lot of momentum. They've had massive turnout, and I think many of their criticisms are very justified given the pushing the boundaries we've seen from this administration of executive overreach and overriding the proper role of Congress.
I know all of this is very complicated, and we're just trying to make a little bit of sense from it. Where can people find you, get more information from you specifically?
Sure, they can go to the Cato Institute's website. You can search for my name specifically on there, Thomas Berry. I write a lot about the separation of powers and the First Amendment, which, as we're seeing here, are very much connected, because the best way to preserve the separation of powers is to speak out and make your voice heard.
Indeed. Thomas Berry, as always, thank you so much for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.